Hello and welcome to my master's presentation. My name is Don Nelson. This is how the implementation of performance tasks promote autonomy, increase the motivation, and higher order thinking for my students. So let's get right into it. Well, the problem that I had was that I got the welcome to the 8th grade speech from my teachers when I realized that my students were not very motivated. And then I realized that my favorite subject is not my students' favorite subject, which is a little bit frustrating at times. There's a total lack of motivation, so that was very frustrating. No enthusiasm at all. My students thought no thinking at all. They wanted the easiest task that they could do to just get through with the class. So not even to mention higher order thinking. There was virtually no thinking. Let me have a worksheet. Let me put down some answer. There's a lot of copying, and very few students read the material. And that was challenging for me because there wasn't a lot of remembering or synthesizing of the product that I was putting out there for them. And then as I experimented, I wore costumes, I used accents, I read out loud to the students. We worked this whole class of note-taking, and the test scores were really anemic. The homework that was turned in was very few students who were doing it at all. So I thought to myself, I wanted to discover the relationship between motivation, their attitude, and the use of performance tasks to increase the students' autonomy. This is really important, really difficult. Instead of asking me if they had to do something, I want the students to be asking, can I do this? Because this is going to be really exciting. What can I do to succeed at this task? Why am I doing it? And how do they feel about doing it? How do they feel about what they've been doing? I want them to ask questions and be enthused and actually want to do some of the things that we were doing. My research questions, number one was, how will the implementation of performance tasks that promote student autonomy increase their motivation? And then the secondary one was, how will the implementation of the performance tasks that promote the student autonomy increase their ability to solve the problems using higher order thinking skills? So I didn't just want them to want to do this. I didn't want to just give them choice. I want them also to do better, not just at the tests, but just in life and figuring things out in general. You need some higher order thinking skills. We're getting these Common Core standards, and those are really important for them to not just be able to solve a problem, but to analyze and synthesize the data and analyze and be able to come up with a positive outcome. That was really important for me. I used my 3rd period class. They're 8th graders, and there were 28 of them. This class had 21 males and only 7 females. This is a tough group because they liked to talk and interact with each other. There was just like a boys' class. A lot of times the girls would try and ask to be in their own separate area away from that big, massive guys. This is my most challenging class because of the male to female ratio. The homework return rate was very low, turned at 20%. 20% was really dismal in my mind. 1 out of every 5 kids. And it wasn't just all the girls doing the homework in this class either. 50% of them, when I gave a lot of class time, 50% of the students were turning their homework. Still, that's a pathetic number. The further study just of our area, 71.2% Hispanic, 22% Caucasian, and almost 3% African American, 3.7% other. 18.2% of our students are living in poverty, so that's a fairly large number. 2% of our population is gay. That's a remarkably low number. 73% English learners, 21% of parents did not graduate from high school. And so that's a high number that we have to deal with. That's 1 out of every 5 students whose parents didn't graduate from high school. 12% of the kids had their parents as college graduates. The median age for people in our area is 36 years of age. In California, the median age is 45.6. So we're already dealing with a much younger population. The median income in our area is $34,000, almost $35,000, whereas in California it's $57,000. So there's quite a disparity between our area and an average Californian. What did I do? Well, I studied the literature that was pertaining to the decline in the motivation of the students, middle school students. To me, it was really important to get background information, to try and figure out what other people had already figured out, to study all that information. I also studied the adolescent brain research. To me, it was really important to find out what the students, how their brains are developing as they are youth and what they need to do to increase those synapses. I also studied teaching in the 21st century and the skills of 21st century students, what they're going to be needing. I studied traditional versus performance task teaching. And so this is a lot of traditional teaching, multiple choice type of things, versus a lot of Common Core type of activities that we're moving toward. After extensive brain research about the middle school students, I determined the brain is going through dramatic changes in the structure and function. A second massive growth of neurons and dendrites and synapses occur during this time period as they're 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th graders. Unless the correct pathways are used through their reading, analyzing, and problem solving, a pruning takes place and the pathways disappear forever. So everyone talks about how important it is from 0 to 2. You got to do a lot of reading. You got to make sure that they're understanding things. But a lot of people don't talk about this second huge growth that happens while they're in this middle school age of 12 to 15 and 16 years of age. I found it really remarkable. It made me feel like my job is a lot more important than I thought it was, as a matter of fact. So that was nice. Children who exercise their brains and lay down the neurons and order their thoughts, they understand abstract ideas and control their impulses a lot better. So teachers should be encouraging a lot of thinking, a lot of skill-driven projects that they should be doing. I also found that tasks should give the students a lot more autonomy and help motivate and improve their attitude. So the kids were really a lot more excited when they got to choose between several different options. And that was really neat. So the methods my methods were such that this information was to be used to create my intervention that I was going to use for my students. I used Bloom's taxonomy, the new version, because there's 2 versions, and I wrote performance tasks that give the students autonomy and allowed them to make decisions that increase higher order thinking through situations. Okay? That was really important. Let's see, I'm going to show you an example really quickly of one of the interventions that I used. And so it is right here. I'm going to have to go over here for a second. Put it up on this computer. I took one of the ideas, one of the challenges that our presidents had to go through, and I made it so that the students had to put themselves in the place of a president. In this case, the year 1797, President Adams is in office, and he needs to make some decisions about the XYZ affair, dealing with the French, a situation that arose that was a real situation. And then I wanted the kids to analyze the situation through reading about it. I gave them a lot of information for them to read about. Then I talked about some of the problems that America might face. We only have a few ships at this point in time. Our Navy is very small. The French are one of the strongest in the world. What are you going to do? Are you going to declare war? Are you going to send delegates back to pay a bribe? Are you going to send the delegates back and don't pay the bribe? Are you going to do nothing? Are you going to convince Congress to build more ships so that we have a stronger Navy? I wanted them to chart their decisions. First, they were to decide as a group what they were going to do, check it off, and then they had to justify why they gave that decision. But the decision-making process wasn't done then. They got a second slip of paper that they had to decide what they were going to do based on the second piece of paper from the first decision. Well, did they make a good decision? Has that led to the ruin of our country? Do they have another decision to make? Do we need to ask the French for peace? Do we need to surrender? Do we need to ask the English to help us out? So it's they had to use, and it's like a choose your own destiny type of decision making process. Kids really dig this, and they always want to know, did I make the same decision as the president made at the time? Did he make a good decision? Did I make a good decision? Was my decision better than what the president did? And so I always found that to be interesting to hear what they had to say about that. It was a 6-week study, 3 weeks of traditional teaching with multiple choice tests, and 3 weeks of these performance tasks that I just showed to you right there. I surveyed the students at the beginning of this and at the end of the 6 weeks. And this is what I found to be really interesting, and I'll share that in a few minutes. I had to select one intervention group. In the end, all of my groups did this process, and they all really enjoyed it. The first task they had to do was create a country. They had a government to create. We'd already talked about governments, economies, maps, flags. We talked about the laws. We'd already talked about the most important laws that we have, the amendments that we have in our Constitution. And they had to create those approximating the United States in 1789. Each day they explained a task for about 5 minutes, and then the students had 40 or 45 minutes to work on it in class. At the end we recapped, and they usually wrote something that they had done. The second week we did presentations, and they were visual and oral. I put them up projected them up on the screen, and the students were able to share what they had done. It was the second half of the second and third week, we did the presidential problems that they were confronted with prior to 1789 and beyond. Then I also made sure to present the vocabulary and the action task with the pros and cons of the incident that Washington or Adams or other presidents had to face, Jefferson. They had to determine what their country would do and write the justification for their actions, which was interesting because some of them had chosen a communistic government, some of them had chosen a dictatorial government, and then they had to decide how their government would react to these situations and also how they individually would react or would want their country to react. So I thought that was really interesting for them. And then I told them, of course, what Washington and the other presidents had done at that point in time. That was maybe the most important part of the whole thing. They really wanted to know. They're dying to know all the time.
Did you do a similar activity with your other groups, or did you do that activity with just one?
Yeah, I did that activity with all the groups. And once they had a taste for it, then I had to continue doing it with all the groups because they really enjoyed it so much. And so that was really, really something that they valued.
Did you keep your period 3 as your main focus group, though?
Period 3 was the main focus group all the way through.
Okay.
I had 3 points of data, student artifacts like journal writing, and they had to do that on a daily basis. They completed the performance tasks and then had to share out how they did on those performance tasks. And then I had teacher observation from my own journal, a checklist, and a data inquiry for student interviews. Every day I had a little checklist sheet that I would check off to see if they were on task. And it became ridiculous. Everyone was so on task, I had to modify my sheet from how often are they on task to just how often are they off task. Because I was putting all these checks down, and it became kind of ridiculous to just keep checking it off. Awesome. It was really cool. It was really neat. The pre-survey formed a baseline, and then I took photos and Xerox copies of their artifacts and showed them on the screen all the time for the students. They had tests, and they completed performance tasks, and some of the performance tasks that they had to complete were thinking of in the way that they had thought as the president, and then they had to, that was how their new testing was. They had a totally different approach to testing. And their final task was a choice of 4 questions to determine their assimilation of the material and in their use of higher order thinking. And so it was a little bit challenging, but they got a lot more out of it than just A, B, C, and D. My analysis and triangulation, I confirmed that my data is valid by continually asking myself, in what ways can I ensure that my results are accurate and truthful? The truth, I had to value the validity. My teacher observations and journals, I used a long period of time to discuss my findings with my colleagues. All the time I would talk about this with my colleagues, and I asked for their opinions. That was a main thing that I had to do. I triangulated my data by using 3 points of data: the student artifacts, the teacher observation, and the third-party interview. I used the results to inform my practice and reflected on my practice, of course. Here are my findings. The pre and post survey included 15 questions. It was like the enjoyment of history, the importance of knowing history as an individual, the present usefulness of the history compared to other subjects, the importance of history in the future and getting a job, going to college, being a good citizen. I had my students answer from not at all to very much on the surveys. I found that they enjoyed it quite a bit. The responses moved up at least one quartile. For example, I enjoyed doing history on the pre-test was 12% for very much, and at the end, the post-test was 48% of the students said that they enjoy very much doing history. So this group right here, when you took a look at it, this group that was so high, this is the pre, was down here. And the post, a lot of these students moved to there, and a lot of these students moved to there. So that at the end, none of them put none at all for how much they enjoy history. And the amount that put not really is significantly less. It's about the same as not at all. So if you compared these numbers and moved them there, and these numbers and added them on, it was like they all shifted up for each question, one opinion up. And that to me is amazing, because it doesn't show that everyone shifted to very much, which I would have liked to have had happen, but it's just that they shifted enough that it became important for my findings to look at that.
Is this all of your students or just the third period?
This is the third period class. I did in the end go ahead and look at the entire group, just because I wanted to find out. And I found the data to be very, very similar to what I had found for just that group. That they had moved up about a quartile. So
you did do pre and post for all of your classes?
I did do pre and post for all my classes, even though the focus was my third period class. Yeah. I try to emphasize, the questions emphasize the importance of understanding and discussion of history. So this is a different area. The just importance of understanding and discussing history, the pre-test 40% and the post-test 67%. And then we're talking about somewhat and above, somewhat and very much, found that the questions that emphasize the importance of history, so it became a lot more important to them once they realized that this is what the presidents had to deal with. It became more real to them. Hardly any, I did have one student who put not at all, but that's a lot better than what I had before. So all of them had shifted up a little bit. So that was nice, to just think that they think it's more important. Now, finding a job and going to college and being a good citizen, what I found was important to me was, at this point in time, none of the students thought that history was totally useless. None of them would. History is totally useless. So at least that had shifted up. It's not like had a huge shift in very much, a little bit of a shift in somewhat. But at least none of them thought that in the future that it was completely useless, which is kind of nice. In off-task, I carried a card noting all the off-task behavior, and I hardly used the card for off-task at all. That interest did not go down, even though we did more of these activities as we went along. Traditionally, we had about 25% that were turning in homework, and then 41% sometimes turned in homework, and then 13% hardly ever turned in their homework, and 25% did, and 21% rarely, and were, of course, the ones that were frequently fooling around. After the intervention, while I was doing the intervention, I got 90% of the assignments turned in. 10% were copied from others, and then 82% turned in 90 to 100% of their homework, and 15% were turning in about 50 to 80% of their homework, And then 3% turned in less than 50% of their work. It amounted to one student, basically, that didn't turn in anything, even though we were doing more exciting things. So,
How do you know if they were copied from another student?
you know that when I read over them, I could see that they had written down the same thing as someone else, and then I had you kind of can theorize as to which student was that one of them had copied off of the other one. But at the same time, I had encouraged them to work together on a lot of things. So even though they had gone ahead and copied off of someone, at least they got the information that was important going through the process and working with the student who really got it. So, and that was a lot better than I'd ever gotten before, so I was still pleased about that.
That's great findings.
Yeah, thank you. In my journal, I noted that students were asking to add tasks that I didn't assign. For example, when we did the countries, they said, hey, can I make money from my country? And then they passed out money to each other that represented the money that their country had done. So when we did these country projects, they created their old country and they made the money and they started handing them out to people in the classroom like it was real money. It was pretty funny. And then a lot of comments like, Mr. Russell, is it okay if, which they were not doing before. There were a lot of discussions about the laws that were really interesting because, for example, some of the students were asking, can I make a law that says you can't have any dogs because they didn't like dogs? Or things like that. And so things that I hadn't really anticipated because we had just talked about the amendments and how important they were. And then some of them came up with really important, no racism, or no, you can't be anti-gay, or whatever it was. But others came up with a couple things like, can we have no dogs in our country or something like that. And then they begged for the decision for the regular presidents, which just cracked me up because they didn't want to wait until the last 5 minutes of class to see what President Adams had done. They wanted to know immediately. Hey, Mr. President, I chose number A. I chose letter A. Is that what the president chose? Did he choose that too? And it was kind of crazy because I'm like, I can't tell you. Just tell me. I won't tell anyone else. I'm like, I cannot tell you. And that's what he chose. And so that was kind of tough too. And then I had a student who went home and studied communism, or he had some examples. He already learned about communism, and he asked if he could make his government communistic so that to make sure that they controlled everything in their country, which I thought was pretty funny. And then we did the post-interview. This is really informative as to why the motivation, attitude, and the higher order thinking skills had increased. They were motivated because the group depended on their work, and it was, of course, interesting. And they could choose how to present the material. They also had a lot of debate. But a lot of it, because the group was depending on each other, they had to make sure that they got their part done. Then they also learned that history is relevant. I'm making history, and they thought that was important. History is one of my favorite subjects. In 5th and 6th grades, I learned about history, but I didn't think about it. Now I think about it. It's fun and cool to learn. This is not A+ student here who said this comment. This is a student who was getting a C or a C- in my class. Is now probably getting an A- in my class and doing a really good job. He is now thinking about it. So I thought that was really neat, his comment. History is people discovering and making records. Family history is important as well. That's what some of them said. And history is challenging, but in a good way. That's what I always like to hear, because when they don't enjoy your class, that's not very much fun.
How did you conduct those interviews? Was it like one-on-one? Was it like a...
Yeah, it was one-on-one. One of my colleagues called them into the hallway.
Okay, cool.
And then they gave their opinions on the set form of questions that I had them ask.
And it was on the video? Or it was...
Oh, no, it was
written
just
out?
recorded, written out, yeah.
Okay.
So my conclusions. First of all, it was very gratifying. It's always gratifying to think that the kids are enjoying your class. The performance task that gave the students autonomy motivated and engaged students. That's pretty important because they actually wanted to do the tasks. student artifacts, discussions, and debates, and they made comments showing a lot of higher order thinking. Half of my time I spent dragging my chair around and sitting at group to group just listening to what they had to say. And it was just fascinating what they were saying about stuff. And then every once in a while I played devil's advocate and I would throw in some comments here and there. But for the most part, I didn't have to say, hey, get back to work. 76% of the students turned in their work that was proficient or above proficient. And before I had done this, it was really challenging for them to turn in anything that was of any proficiency at all. So they really put a lot more time and effort into their work. And those who turned in the below proficient also improved. It wasn't like they magically became proficient. It was just that they had put enough time and effort into it to just show that they had gone from a below basic or to a basic type of a standard. And that is everything. Thank you very much for being here.